I was a 24-year-old pastor, freshly out of seminary, when an elderly woman made an appointment to come and see me. She was, I don't know, about 29, but it seemed elderly at the time. And one of the things that was most memorable about that appointment was that she cried the entire time that we were together. The tears just flowed down her face, dripped off her chin, onto her clothing. Quite frankly, it looked like she had been out walking in the rain. Her face and hands and clothes were so wet from tears. And as she cried, she explained that her marriage was disintegrating in front of her, that her husband had had an extramarital affair, that he had moved out, that he was living with the other woman, and that he wanted a divorce. And then she said something that just totally took me by surprise. With the tears still flowing after all that she had said, she added, "And I love him so much." So is that possible? That you can have every good and rational reason to hate someone and all the emotion of love at the same time? Indeed, it is, both for that 20-something wife and for the 60-something king of Israel named David. David and his court had abandoned the city of Jerusalem. They fled in anticipation of an oncoming military assault led by Prince Absalom, David's own son, who was marching on the city. And a new civil war was about to begin in Israel. It was Israelite against Israelite. It was traitor against the king. It was son against his own father. Absalom was out to take the crown and take his own father's life in the process. This self-anointed King Absalom had gathered a surprisingly large army with tens of thousands of soldiers and amazingly officers and advisors who previously had been loyal to David, his father. When they marched into the city of Jerusalem with their swords drawn and with their spears pointed, to their surprise, they found a largely empty city. Hardly anyone was there. And so Absalom needed advice because he was new at this business of being king. And the first advice that he sought and received was politically brilliant and morally repulsive. Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give me your advice. What should we do?" Ahithophel answered, "Lie with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. When David had abandoned the city of Jerusalem, he left 10 women behind who were to take care of the palace. And on the advice of his and formerly his father's advisor, Absalom set up a tent and lined up the women in a parade for sexual union that was observed by anyone who was there to see it. So there was no doubt what was going on in that tent. You see, this is what the pagans did. When a new king came to the throne, one of the ways that he would mark the end of the last dynasty and the beginning of his new rule was to take over the harem of the previous ruler. It was a symbol of the conquest. And as strange and bizarre and repulsive as that may sound to us today, maybe you picked up the story 2 weeks ago on the border of Rwanda and the Congo, where soldiers gang raped 150 Congolese women. It was and is a way to humiliate. It's not just about lust, it's also about politics, a powerful political statement. And Ahithophel's brutal advice was specially customized to the politics of the day, because there must have been those who were fearful that this rift between father and son might somehow be mended in the family. And where would that leave those who had abandoned David and switched their loyalty to Absalom? If the family rift is resolved, then maybe David will come back into power, and that David will at least distance himself from them and perhaps kill them as traitors. But Ahithophel gave advice that made the break between David and Absalom absolutely permanent. Everyone knew that this was an affront that David would never, ever forgive, and guaranteed that they would never reconcile. And there is an awful irony to this terrible piece of the story, because it was years before that Absalom was so deeply offended and outraged over the rape of his sister Tamar. So much so that he plotted and planned for 24 months and eventually murdered the rapist, his own brother Amnon. And now he who once was so outraged had himself become the rapist. David's former advisor, Ahithophel, next gave military counsel. This was on how to kill the king. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed." The plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. It was more than good. This was brilliant. This was really smart military advice. To quickly take his army, they were just arrived, they were ready to go, and to pursue after David. David was tired. He wasn't very far away. He didn't have much of a defense. This would be quick and easy, and they could just kill David, and what alternative would that leave for David's followers except to switch their loyalty to the new king Absalom? After all, he was the crown prince. Ahithophel had been the advisor to David. He knew where he was, he knew what he was going to do, and he knew how to get him. It was brilliant, just brilliant. Except God was on David's side, and God was against Absalom. And David had spies in Absalom's court. Absalom said, "Summon also Hushai the Archite, so that we can hear what he has to say." When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, "Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion." Hushai replied to Absalom, "The advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men, they are fighters, and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he's hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, 'There has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom,' and then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter, and those with him are brave. So I advise you, let all Israel attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive." Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel." For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. This was terrible, terrible military advice. But it was eloquently and persuasively presented. All leaders should be careful of the counsel that they receive, because there are some people that give very good counsel, they just don't deliver it very well, and there's some really lousy advice that is magnificently presented. And that's what Hushai did. He gave terrible military advice, but he gave it so persuasively. He was saying, your father, he's familiar with guerrilla warfare. He's going to be hiding out. You're not going to be able to easily find him. That just wasn't true. And what you need to do is get your army ready, and when the time is right, then go after him. But in actuality, Hushai was on the side of David. And what he was doing was buying time for David, and Absalom, he bought into it. But I think the most interesting and perhaps important line of this story is in 2 Samuel 7:14. For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. We have an interesting expression in our English language that the devil is in the details. But when you read the Bible, you discover that God is in the details. That God was in the royal court. God was working in the heads of the advisors. God was working in the words that were being spoken. And God was on the side of David, and God was bringing around all the pieces to accomplish his good purpose, even though it appeared to be in the midst of catastrophe. We need to remember that both in our personal lives and in our political thinking and activities, because too many times we assume that the difficulty of the moment is the final result of what is going to happen, when the truth is that God is in the details, and that God is at work, and that our ultimate trust is in him to accomplish that which is good and right, even when everything seems to be wrong and bad. For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai not only convinced Absalom to follow bad advice, but he also sent out spies to communicate to David, so David knew everything that was going on. And so that bought him time. And in the time that he had, the people nearby started to give supplies. And the word went out. And men loyal to David started flowing in from villages and towns and across the countryside and into different provinces, until finally David now had an army and supplies and was ready to fight. And the dreadful day, it finally came. And it had to be one of the very worst days in David's life. How would you anticipate a battle against your own son that is a battle to the death? David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. The king answered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate while all the men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded his generals, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of his commanders. So what is he here? Is he a king? Or is he a father? And the answer is yes. And he was in an impossible conflict. It was an impossible choice. He had to choose between his crown and kingdom and the life of his own son. And so here is this fighter, David, one of the most renowned and fabled fighters in all of military history, standing and reviewing his troops as they go out to a decisive battle. And the orders he is giving say, and you all watch out for my boy. You take care of my boy. You don't hurt him. You don't hurt Absalom. But life just isn't like that. that we face these impossible choices where you just can't have it both ways. And sometimes awful, awful decisions must be made, stepping to one side or the other of lines that are drawn in the sand by the tears that we have shed. The army marched into the field to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There the army of Israel was defeated by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's head got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. Joab took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So it was over. The rebellion was over. The prince was dead. Now, who is going to tell the king? Emeritus, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of his enemies." "You are not the one to take the news today," Joab told him. "You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to a Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen." Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Let me tell you about the day when my brother died. It was in late December, just a few days before Christmas. He was doing business in the Southeast. His family was living in Connecticut. He got on a plane with a connection in Charlotte while his daughter waited to pick him up at the airport, LaGuardia Airport in New York. The connection was tight, and so he ran through the Charlotte airport, got onto the plane, took his carry-on luggage, lifted it up to put it in the overhead rack, and died in the aisle of a U.S. Airlines flight. The telephone call came to Charlene, and she told me. And my mother was visiting with us here in the Twin Cities for Christmas. She'd come a few days earlier, and she was sitting on the couch in our living room. And I knew it was my job to tell her. There is some giving of news that cannot be delegated to anyone else. And so I sat down on the couch next to her, and I will tell you that that is perhaps one of the most difficult things that I have ever done in my life. Her father had died when she was 5 years old, so she knew what it was to be an orphan. Her husband, my father, had died 3 years earlier after more than 50 years of marriage. So she knew what it meant to be a widow. And now there I was, telling her that her son was unexpectedly dead. And as you know, there is no word in our English language to describe someone who has lost a child. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has delivered you today from all those who rose up against you." The king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man." The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." When I was a junior in high school, we had a substitute teacher one day. Quite honestly, in all my education, he is the only substitute teacher that I can remember, with all due apologies to all who are here as substitute teachers. He started the day in our class by opening a Bible to 2 Samuel chapter 18 and asking for a volunteer student to read this story. And he was obviously agitated by the student's lack of passion and angst when he read David's response to the message that his son had died. And so he started picking out other students in the room and brought them up, one of them was me, and asked us to read it with feeling, to put ourselves into David's situation, to read it with passion. Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom. If only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. I didn't think of it at the time, but I've thought about it since. I wonder if that substitute teacher had lost his son. David soon dropped into the abyss of grief. He just couldn't stop crying. He didn't care about anybody or anything. If he lost his kingdom, then so what? He lost his kingdom. If his army had just gotten one of the greatest, most historic military victories, so what? It had turned into something of a day of shame and embarrassment for his army. And so General Joab was told, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. And for the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning because on that day, the troops heard it said, the king is grieving for his son. The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, oh, my son, Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son! And Joab went into the house of the king and said, today you have humiliated all your men. They have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and you hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth until now. And so the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. And when the men were told, the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. Now, I don't pretend to understand David's grief. It's not been my experience, and I don't want it ever to be my experience. He was so down that he didn't care about anybody or anything else. And grief does that. General Joab was a perceptive and a courageous leader. He knew that David had to be confronted, and he knew that this was a message that no one else could deliver. And he knew that it might cost him his life. It did cost him his job. He was replaced as the general of the army because of the confrontation that he made. But the kingdom itself was at stake. And so he told David to get up and wipe off his tears and get down there and join the celebration of a military victory that had cost him the life of his son. This weekend marks the anniversary of 9/11. And so we are reminded that sometimes we live in a world and have lives where there are unspeakable tragedies. It may be some terrible terror attack on our nation. It may be the death of someone we love. It may be a dream that is shattered. It may be a marriage that ends or wealth that is lost or a job that defined our identity that is gone. Or it may be that there just seems to be no hope, no prospect for health or life. And there's no name for it. It's a grief for which there is no name. And there are some who come to us like Joab and say, just suck it up and move on. You just got to get past this. And there are others who come and rightly teach us the stages of grief when we can hardly imagine that we will ever be able to cope or accept. And then there are others who come and throw their arms around us and say not a word of confrontation or counsel. They simply cry. They weep along with us. And then there is David, who gives to us the advice of Psalm 31. Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and my body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. And so be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. Our Father, on our day of unspeakable tragedy, in the midst of our deepest grief, remind us afresh that you are our God and that our times are in your hands. And because of you, may we be strong. May we take heart, for we are those whose hope is in the Lord. In Jesus' name.